Every time I chant that, I also remember Sayadaw Upandita saying always at the end of that, Apamadena Sampadeta, which means please strive with diligence. And everybody says in return, Amabante, yes, Venerable Sir. So that may come out of my mouth if I say Apamadena Sampadeta, you know what to say back. In this case, you would say Amma Ayya, which means
Okay.
yes, Venerable Sister. I want to talk about striving with diligence tonight and how to strive with diligence and balance. Continuing on from where I finished yesterday, if you'll remember, I spoke about Karuna in its four aspects, how it manifests as non-cruelty, how it promotes the relief of suffering, how it functions such that the heart cannot turn away from suffering, and how it arises because we see the helplessness of beings stuck in this realm of suffering, and how its near enemy is pity or grief, and of course, how the far enemy is cruelty. So when we hear all that, particularly the last part, we begin to judge our practice or assess our practice. We think, oh, I'm full of self-pity and grief. I must be a failure at this practice. And I want to begin by saying, sorry, no, that's not correct. That's just the ego playing tricks on you, trying to own a process that has nothing to do with any of this. But if we get stuck there with that judgment, we can get tighter and tighter and tighter by trying really, really, really hard to practice well. And the more we try, the tighter we get. This is a familiar conundrum for many of us. I mean, we've all been there. So how do we strive with diligence without doing this? And it all comes down to that first thing that I was talking about in terms of what we will be developing in this retreat, and that's attitude. And this actually doesn't differ a lot from the metta practice. So a lot of this will be familiar with many of you. The attitude we need for onward leading metta practice is the same as the attitude we need for onward leading karuna practice. The main difference being that karuna practice can be more intense. And so we see more clearly how we go off the rails with effort and with attitude. So I want to start talking about attitude by talking about something completely different. I want to talk about dukkha. And I want to talk about dukkha because often when we slip and get in trouble with attitude and with effort, we've forgotten about the nature of dukkha. And part of the challenge of compassion practice is we are really, really, really resistant to facing this. Often we come to practice because we seek happiness. I mean, we want to be happy. We don't want to suffer. And nobody tells us right at the beginning, the only way out of suffering is straight into it. We don't talk about this because it would be really hard to fill retreats if we did. Who would come to a meditation retreat? Oh, come and suffer. But what happens when you do this is this magical kind of transformation of the heart. When we undo the hooks that keep us stuck in suffering by going into it and just seeing things clearly, there is this profound joy that arises in the middle of all the suffering of life. And I know Dalai Lama, I'm very far from that, but I've had so many small moments like that here in Myanmar at the monastery where conditions are interesting, difficult, but there are these small moments of joy. And this is what happens when the mind is willing to let go. Just requires a complete surrender in the face of suffering. This is why it's the first noble truth. There's a wonderful sutta in the Digha Nikaya called the Mahanidana Sutta. And in the Mahanidana Sutta, the Buddha speaks of a dark chain of causation. Or the Buddha starts with feeling, pleasant feeling, and links the experience of that step by step to all the suffering of the world. It goes through a fairly familiar progression of, there's feeling, and then there's pursuit and desire and attachment. These are all quite familiar.
Grasping,
Pursuit, and then gain, and then seeking, decision making, attachment, possessiveness, unwillingness to share, defensiveness. And then he says various evil, unwholesome things originate: taking up weapons, conflicts, quarrels,
yes.
disputes, insults, slander, and falsehood. And given what's going on in the world, when I reread this list the other day, I thought, wow, this is very familiar. It all starts with feeling down. So there's so much suffering in the world that's just based on trying to hold on to something that will not last. And this is so sad, but there it is. And we're so deluded by this desire for things to be stable and reliable and, causing us to be happy in a predictable way. We don't even know that we're deluded. We can know intellectually that all conditioned things arise and pass away. We can know intellectually that all things are fundamentally incapable of providing lasting happiness. We can know intellectually about what are called the 8 worldly winds. These being the change between what is pleasant becomes what becomes painful, or what we gain, we lose, or maybe there's a good reputation, fame, and then that turns to disrepute. And anything we gain, we stand to lose. These worldly winds blow through everybody's life. Everybody. Happiness comes from allowing that. It comes from holding on to something that's moving. Some people refer to it as rope burn. So like when you hold on to a rope and it slides through your hand too fast, you get a burn. And I really like this metaphor because if you've ever had one of those experiences, it's really, really painful. And this is what happens to our heart when we hang on. We cling to what is constantly changing. We cling to what is unreliable. So what does this have to do with compassion? I think you probably already know, but I'll talk about it a little bit. So, as I said, we have to face suffering. I mean, this is, as I said, the whole week is about learning to be with this, learning to be with it internally in ourselves, and learning how not to close down when somebody else is suffering, how not to turn to cruelty and just say, oh, get over it, or whatever that looks like. This is such a beautiful quality of heart, that ability to be with somebody who is suffering, even if we think they're suffering over something that they shouldn't be suffering over. And I'm sure you've all had that experience of having somebody, really heartbroken about something, and you think, oh, God, get over it. This is nothing. We get impatient with people sometimes like that. And we want them to just, kind of wake up in the morning and, realize, oh, this was a big waste of time. What was I thinking? And it's very easy to see this impatience when it arises towards somebody else. It's really hard to see it when it arises towards ourselves. And this tendency to be impatient with ourselves in the face of suffering is the root and the biggest hurdle of all the trouble we have in the practice, all the trouble we have trying to open to suffering. How many of us has said to ourselves, how many times have I experienced this? I'm so tired of it. And we just want to be done with it. That is the same kind of impatience that says to another person, get over it. But when we direct it towards ourselves, we don't even know we're doing it. And we can be so resistant to facing suffering, to seeing it again and again and again and again and again. And there's a paradox as well. because we can be resistant to being at peace. We're caught in this terrible pincher between not wanting to suffer and not wanting to be at peace. So this can manifest in all sorts of ways. So perhaps we're stuck in, say, grief, which, as you know, is not compassion. It's that near enemy of compassion. But we're stuck there. And we have this very strong emotional response. And so maybe we shed some tears. It's quite intense. And then we notice it's about to go, it's getting less. It's about to go away. And what do we do then? We begin to think about the grief and bring it back. The mind is so perverse. You know, the grief is suffering, but we don't want it to go away. We keep bringing it back. And then we have this emotional thing again. And then it starts going away. And then we think about it and it goes up and down and up and down. It keeps going. And I've experienced the same thing with self-pity, where something intense is happening and I think about it and it gets a really strong response. And then that begins to subside. And it's like, and then I tell myself the story over and over and over again. And this is just one example of how we resist happiness. A number of people have mentioned various forms of resistance, both in the sharing and in the interviews in the last couple of days. Being resistant to the practice, being resistant to the suffering itself, being resistant to all sorts of forms of resistance that keep us from completely engaging in the practice. So we want to be free from suffering, but we don't want to do what it takes to be free from suffering. It would be funny if it weren't so poignant. It's actually really sad, but we're human. You know, that's how many of us are habituated. So the attitude we need with all of this is profound and kind patience and a real tenderness. Now, often with the metta practice, I think of the mind as a toddler having a temper tantrum. And we just have to hold that 3-year-old child gently. With compassion, it's more complicated. So I tend to think of the mind that resists compassion as a teenager with an attitude. You know, the teenager that's learned some nasty words and has a nasty attitude is like, no, I'm not going to do what you tell me to do. You can insert your own bad words there that I won't articulate. You know, no way, I'm not going to do that. Don't make me face suffering. So anybody that's raised a teenager knows force doesn't work. You just have to let that attitude be there and not make a big deal out of it by, even talking about it. Certainly not demanding a different attitude. That doesn't work either. Sometimes the best thing to do is just to put it aside. Oh yeah, roll your eyes. It's like, okay, we're a teenager today. And then just somehow, as best as you can, to keep going with the practice. So it's like being on a long car journey with a teenager in the back seat. They're going to be sulking back there and with a really bad attitude, but everybody's going in the same direction. And you just let them be there. And you just surround them with kindness, understanding the complexity of the suffering involved, because we certainly have a complex relationship with suffering and with our stories about suffering. So there's nothing easy about it. The only thing that works is love. That profound kindness of metta that just allows that to be there, that doesn't push against it or push it away, but surrounds it with kindness. So not only do we have this tender attitude towards the suffering, but the tender attitude towards the bad attitude we might have about dealing with it. This is why compassion for ourselves is so profoundly important. To forgive ourselves for being imperfect and kindly and tenderly hold both the aspect of ourself that wants to be free from suffering and the aspect of ourself that is totally resistant to that. Not going into the middle of any of that, but just letting it all be there and continuing to radiate compassion with the phrase, with the inclination, even if it's, go ahead, don't tell, I'll continue after that. So it's really we meet everything that is not compassion. We meet all the barriers vividly, even more vividly than in the metta practice. And we forgive ourselves for all the restlessness or the reactivity or the unwillingness to go there in the first place. Just all of the ways we react to the pain of the world and the pain of ourselves. So, very, very practically in the practice, all you need to do is kind of zoom out, have a wide angle view of it all, remembering the First Noble Truth and realizing that it's hard to do this. We don't want to open to suffering. Taking a deep breath and just continuing. It's so easy. We just have to keep connecting to the phrase, connecting to the person, even if it's mechanical, even if there's resistance, we just keep going. Not to have a particular result, but just to keep going. One of the hardest things to face about suffering is there's no end to it in this conditioned realm.
There's no end
to it in this conditioned realm. The Buddha said in the Samyutta Nikaya, there's no end of beings roaming and wandering in, hindered by ignorance and fettered by craving.
Say it again.
No end of beings roaming and wandering, hindered by ignorance and fettered, tied by craving. For such a long time, you have experienced suffering, anguish, and disaster. And then he says, he says, it is enough to become dispassionate towards them and liberated from them. It is enough to become equanimous about suffering.
Okay.
I'm paraphrasing here.
Because when he says about them, does he mean the people? Does he mean the action?
He means suffering.
Right. That's what I wasn't clear. So please
it is
kind.
enough,
Can you say
it is enough to become dispassionate towards the suffering and to be liberated from it. We so resist this. There's no end to suffering in samsara. The only end to suffering is to stop clinging. And until we stop clinging and all beings stop clinging, there will be suffering. That is why compassion is essential. And that's the root of this basic attitude of surrender to it. Because we're not just surrendering to suffering, we're surrendering to the need for compassion. Completely understanding that we can't fix this world, and completely understanding that the open heart that quivers in response to this is the only way forward. This takes gentle, endless patience. This gradual development of equanimity about all of this is something we cannot and must not force. But please do not be discouraged. Little by little by little, it comes. And that's such a sweet thing. So all it takes, as the Sayadaws say here, just please continue. Not trying to change anything, but just trying our best. Apamadena, sampadeta. Please strive with diligence to rest back in this. Just to receive it the way it is, kindly, with the wish that we and all beings be free from suffering and the causes of suffering. So I want to close this afternoon with a beautiful quote from Nyanaponika, a German monk in Sri Lanka who died. He says, "It is compassion that opens the door to freedom, that makes the narrow heart as wide as the world. Compassion takes from the heart the inert weight, the paralyzing heaviness, and it gives wings to those who cling to the lowlands of self." It gives wings to those who cling to the low. Donatella, you are amazing. But I love that quote.
It's like we're stuck in self-centeredness and self-centered resistance and self-centered reactivity and self-pity and ever all these impediments to compassion. But in spite of that, it is that very compassion that we're resistant to that gives us the wings to transcend all of it. So no matter how you think your practice is going, apamadena sampadeta, just continue gently. Even if all it is you're putting your body there, there's so much resistance, you don't even want to do the practice. Just put your body there. Sit, walk, sit, walk. Thank you, everybody, for your kind attention. And thank you
Grazie.
for your practice.